In 1990, Capcom and High-Tech Expressions released Mega Man on DOS. It's a strange game, especially when compared to the NES titles. The bosses are wacky, the enemies seem out of place, and gameplay feels sluggish. The game is infamous within the Mega Man fandom. Even Capcom wants fans to forget about it. In the Mega Man Official Complete Works book, Mega Man on DOS is missing. But behind the game is a story about a Mega Man fan who followed his passions. Programmer Steven Rozner worked on it by himself, in his spare time after work. One could argue that Mega Man on DOS is an early example of a fan game that actually got published. And if you can believe it, Rozner and his brother made a sequel too. Let's dive into the strange world of Mega Man games on DOS. This episode of The Gaming Historian is sponsored by Honey. These days, it feels like all we do is online shopping, and luckily, I have Honey to help me out. It's the free browser extension that scours the internet for promo codes and automatically tests them when you're checking out. It's super simple to use. When you go to checkout, Honey will pop up. Just click Apply Coupons. Honey will find the best coupon and apply it to your cart. As you may know, I recently started grad school, and I have to buy a lot of expensive academic books. Honey saved the day and got me $13 off my halfpricebooks.com order. That's awesome. It's a no-brainer. If you shop online, you should have Honey installed. It works with every browser, and again, it's free. Go to joinhoney.com/gaminghistorian, click install, and start saving money today. That's joinhoney.com/gaminghistorian. Throughout the 80s, the average price of the personal computer kept coming down, which made PCs more and more accessible. This brought computer programming to the masses. Suddenly, everyday people were learning how to make software, including video games. Steven Rozner of Thousand Oaks, California, was one of these people. He taught himself to program with whatever computer he could get his hands on. The Apple II, a TRS-80, the Commodore VIC-20. He ported the game Berserk to his friend's old S100 bus computer, the same type of computer found in the movie War Games.
That's pretty much what told me programming was going to be my deal. And then my dad, after seeing this, he paid it was $600 for the Commodore 64 when it first came out, and another $600 probably within a year or two to get the disk drive for it. That's pretty much how it started, and it was really just doing little games and trying to come up with things that would help us play Dungeons and Dragons.
After high school, Rozner enrolled in community college, but he quickly learned that he was ahead of the curve.
When I got into college, probably got at least an associate's degree worth, but I never, finished. Occasionally I would know more than the teacher. I remember dropping a class. After I corrected the teacher twice, I knew I wasn't going to get a good grade. So, there was that. So I was pretty much self-taught.
At the same time, Rozner got a job at Hughes Aircraft through his father's connections. He programmed databases for the accounting department. It was a mundane job that didn't pay much. Rozner hoped that, eventually, he could work his way into the video game industry. Then came a very lucky break.
I was toying around with a karate game. It was like a Karateka or whatever, one of the very first karate games was. I basically made a copy of that on my Commodore. And then some friends who, had started a pizza joint delivered to a little company out near Thousand Oaks. And the guy said, "Hey, if you know anybody who programs, just give them the business card." So I went over there with this game that I was, making as kind of like a demo.
Rozner interviewed at a small software company named Pacific Data Works, which primarily did contract work. One of their biggest clients was Capcom USA, located in Sunnyvale, California. The company was the U.S. subsidiary of Capcom Japan and brought over their coin-op games for distribution in the United States. But in 1986, Nintendo of America chose Capcom USA as one of the first 4 licensees for their new console, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Capcom USA learned quickly that the real money would be in consumer sales. Executives put Joe Morisi, a regional sales manager, in charge of Capcom USA's consumer division. They ported their most popular coin-op games over to the NES, brokered a licensing deal with Disney, and hired subcontractors to port titles to the personal computer. One of those companies was Pacific DataWorks. Capcom hired the company to port Street Fighter, a popular arcade fighting game, to the Commodore 64. So when Steven Rozner interviewed for the job at Pacific DataWorks and presented his karate game demo, they immediately hired him to help program Street Fighter.
There's 2 versions. There's one that came out of the UK that's not very good. And then there's my version, which it doesn't have the last guy because he was too big to kind of get the sprite system, to build. So rather than make something poor, we decided to, just leave out, Sagat. But it was actually, a very good, Commodore 64 port.
In addition to Street Fighter, Rozner worked on Bionic Commando, Hat Trick, and even an unreleased NES version of Street Fighter. Porting games proved challenging.
When I was working at Pacific DataWorks, literally what you would do is you would play the arcade game and then you would basically copy as best as you could. The artists would redraw everything, you would reprogram everything, the whole 9 yards.
Eventually, Rozner and 2 other employees left Pacific DataWorks and joined another software company, Riggs International. They only made 1 game, Pocket Rockets, a motorcycle racing game. Not long after, Capcom USA's Joe Morisi offered to acquire Riggs International and make them Capcom USA's internal development team. They accepted, and soon Rozner was working for Capcom.
The kind of motive of 3 of us, that actually got brought into Capcom was the idea that Capcom USA would start actually, trying to develop stuff. It was generally going to be PC games.
Unfortunately, the internal development team never materialized.
There was a couple of little projects that were being worked on when we got there that never actually saw the light of day. There was a little World War I aircraft. It was basically, the Allies versus, the Germans, and kind of like a little barnstorming game. I don't think I really worked on anything or got anything produced while I was at Capcom or published while I was at Capcom.
Instead, Rozner had to review PC titles from external developers. He missed his true passion, programming. With nothing on the horizon at work, Rozner programmed something for himself. In his spare time, he developed a DOS version of one of his new favorite NES games, Mega Man. Mega Man was one of Capcom's newest characters, and it became a powerhouse franchise. Mega Man graced the covers of video game magazines, had a starring role in cartoons, and was consistently a top-selling game on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
The fact that you had to learn to understand what weapon would damage somebody, and so you kind of had to create an order in which you would go and do things. And this is before the advent of books that would tell you exactly what order to do stuff, right? You had to literally parse these things out by just playing the game 10,000 times. So I thought it an extremely intelligent game. The fact that you kind of had to put all this thought into it. You couldn't just willy-nilly go through.
Rozner did everything himself. Graphics, sounds, level design, enemy and boss patterns. It was a daunting task for one person to complete, but he pressed forward. The game has an electricity theme. Mega Man must enter a top-secret compound, take down 3 robot masters, and defeat the evil Dr. Wily. Previous Mega Man games began with a stage select to choose which robot master players wanted to fight. But Mega Man on DOS begins with an introduction stage. Mega Man must get past the security gate and a robot guard dog before reaching the stage select screen. This is a way for the player to get used to the game before jumping into a level. Over the years, the Mega Man games have become somewhat famous for having opening stages, Mega Man X in particular. Mega Man on DOS's opening stage is by no means great. The guard dog takes a lot of hits to kill and instantly respawns. It's best to just run through it. But it is, technically, the first Mega Man game to have an introduction stage. There are only 3 robot masters: Dynaman, Voltman, and Sonic Man. Levels feel somewhat empty, but that could be because there is no music. Control-wise, Mega Man feels pretty close to the NES games. He even has that little foot shuffle when you press on the D-pad quickly. One of the big differences between this game and the NES games is how players progress through levels. Due to technical limitations, the Mega Man games on NES had horizontal scrolling, but no vertical scrolling. Stages were sort of chained together into sections. But Mega Man on DOS has both types of scrolling, and so the stages feel like one big level. The enemies are somewhat strange. Mega Man fights against rats, mosquitoes, birds, and bees. There are a few familiar enemies like Sniper Joe, but they rarely pop up. On the surface, Mega Man on DOS feels like an outlier in the series, but it has unique origins. It was a fun side project made by one programmer, and Rozner received no assistance from Capcom. He made what he wanted. It was, essentially, a fan game.
I just made the game, period. Like everything, sound, graphics. I see every once in a while on the things when people talk about it, they just don't get it. Well, my name's on everything because literally, I had to do all of the audio bleeps and bloops, I had to do the artwork. The design of it was just something I did. It mimics other Mega Man games in the fact that you have to, get weapons to defeat different bosses, but it was just me.
While working on the game, Steven Rozner realized he couldn't stay at Capcom. He wanted to make games for a living again.
I guess that would be... boredom's not the right word. It was just missing programming. I really, really, really liked programming. I couldn't tell you exactly why. I think it's got both artistic and logical sides, and my brain was always both.
When Rozner told Joe Morrissey he was leaving, he got a surprise. Morrissey knew that Rozner was working on a Mega Man game for DOS as a side project. Because the series was so popular, Morrissey wanted to get Mega Man on as many platforms as possible, for exposure and extra revenue. He offered to publish the game. So in 1990, Capcom and publisher High-Tech Expressions released Mega Man for DOS. To save money on the cover, Capcom slightly altered the box art from Mega Man 3 on NES. This art was also used for the Game Boy game Mega Man: Dr. Wily's Revenge. Rozner was back to making video games. He started doing freelance work for various companies under the name Rozner Labs. Rozner worked on the Great Waldo Search on NES and Darkwing Duck for the TurboGrafx 16. He even ported the Ninja Gaiden arcade game to computers. Soon his brother William, who had a background in art and architecture, joined him to assist with development.
We pretty much were kind of co-developing. I would do the programming, I would create the tools to do the artwork and everything, and then Bill would pretty much do all of the artwork and stuff that would go into things.
While porting games brought in money, it was not as fulfilling as making an original game. So the Rozner brothers came up with a concept for an environmentally themed game called Eco Man. Players took control of Eco Man, a little guy in a hazmat suit who went around oil rigs, underwater caves, and boats, transforming mutated enemies back to normal. They worked on the game for several months before pitching it to publisher High-Tech Expressions. High-Tech Expressions, which had an exclusive licensing deal with Capcom, agreed to publish the game under one stipulation: change Eco Man to Mega Man. Rozner Labs agreed and began making the necessary changes. In 1993, Capcom and High-Tech Expressions published Mega Man 3: The Robots Are Revolting. Many people find the title of the game confusing. What happened to Mega Man 2? There is no Mega Man 2 for DOS. The game was only titled Mega Man 3 because of the cover art. One of the bosses from the NES version of Mega Man 3 closely resembled one of the bosses from the Mega Man 3 DOS game. So, once again, to save money, Capcom reused the box art and called the game Mega Man 3. If people thought the first Mega Man DOS game was strange, Mega Man 3 was even stranger. But that's because the game was originally never supposed to be a Mega Man game. The levels are massive living worlds. Enemies don't respawn, even if Mega Man loses a life. This time around, the robot masters are Bitman, Shark Man, Wave Man, Oil Man, Blade Man, and Torch Man. Their portraits are based on bosses from the NES games. For example, Blade Man is a modification of Metal Man's portrait from Mega Man 2 on the NES. Another surprise is that, for the first time ever, Mega Man can swim. The feature wouldn't return until Mega Man 8 on the Sony PlayStation. William Rozner stated, "Capcom didn't hate it, otherwise we would have had to change it out." After Mega Man 3's release, Steven and William Rozner officially incorporated Rozner Labs as Rozner Labs Software Group. They attended trade shows looking to elicit work from bigger companies. They aimed to get high-paying console work, but their specialty was porting games to the computer. They continued to work with High-Tech Expressions and Capcom on various projects. One of those projects was Mega Man X. Capcom had recently reinvented Mega Man with a new franchise that took place 100 years after the original games. Mega Man X came out on the Super Nintendo in 1993. Joe Morisi, still at Capcom, approached Rozner Labs about porting the game to the computer. And this time, Capcom was willing to help.
That one was great because I think we got DAT tape audio, we got the graphics. We basically got most everything, although I couldn't get the code for Mega Man X. So with that was one where literally we had to play the Super Nintendo and recreate, everything from the ground up.
Capcom released Mega Man X for DOS in 1995. It came packaged with a 6-button controller. The game sold well, but it is by no means a perfect port and has some minor differences from the Super Nintendo version. Bosses feel more aggressive. X controls much differently, and all the ride armors are missing. But if players didn't have a Super Nintendo, it was a way to get in on the Mega Man craze.
Again, it was a whole different market. There weren't really a lot of PC games. A lot of the PC games weren't great. I think that's why a lot of people, if you see the people who really like, the Mega Man PC games, it's like, what was out there was really not great. Ports that were out there were really, really horrible. Where people just coded it as poorly as possible. I was told on a number of ports that I worked on, do it fast. It doesn't matter if it really, is horrible. And even with bugs, they would say, no, we're just going to push this out.
2 years later, the Rozner brothers sought new opportunities and shut down Rozner Labs. Steven Rozner bounced around the industry for a while, including a stint at Electronic Arts, where he worked on a variety of sports titles. Today, the Rozner brothers are running their own company again, Fun Spray Games. Currently, they are working on their passion project. The Rozner brothers always wanted to make their own RPG, so together, they are working on one for Android and iOS. The Mega Man games on DOS are certainly strange when compared to the other games in the Mega Man franchise, and they aren't necessarily good games. The Awesome Games Done Quick charity has featured both Mega Man and Mega Man 3 in its lineup. Capcom has never officially acknowledged the games since their release. Although they have reused some boss names, like Oil Man and Blade Man, they have nothing to do with the DOS games.
I mean, they are what they, were. They're kind of like, homages and what have you. Capcom has always been about, fan art and whatever. If nothing else, I mean, it was a super early version of, fan art programming.
Capcom has since taken a neutral approach to fan games. They've stated that they can't legally sanction fan games, but they also won't go after them either. In 2012, they even officially licensed a fan game, Street Fighter X Mega Man, and released it for free. People love to make fun of the Mega Man games on DOS, but by looking at their backstory, it's easier to see these titles in a new light. At the time, Capcom was trying to expand its consumer division by porting popular games to the computer. There was little to no concern about continuity or quality. The Mega Man DOS games were, essentially, fan games that Capcom agreed to publish for a quick buck. That's all for this episode of The Gaming Historian. Thanks for watching.
Funding for Gaming Historian is provided in part by supporters on Patreon. Thank you.